Pirates beat the Phillies 7-0 in a one-hitter at PNC Park on this Pittsburgh postgame Friday night. I'm Matt Gajtka with Mike Asti. We're not going to talk very much about the game, though. A tremendous
we are not, no.
For the Pirates. It's post-trade deadline talk that we're going to get into because we knew the Pirates were going to be active, or at least Ben Cherington and crew were going to try to be active, to move some players, to continue to turn over that minor league system and continue the job that he started doing last year, now that he's seen more than 100 games, close to a full season's worth, basically, at this point right now. So I think Cherington knows what he has, and now he knows who he doesn't have, because he sent off 6 separate players over the past, call it 36 hours. Then you throw in the Adam Frazier trade on top of that, Mike. And you have a nice sample of moves here that should allow this era to move forward a lot more quicker than it was. And last year was a tough one, I think, for Cherington to evaluate what he had. But here, as we sit getting ready to go into August with the one true trade deadline in the rearview mirror, no waiver trades this year, remember, I think it added to a very entertaining day across Major League Baseball. But for the Pirates, nothing blockbuster-like or even blockbuster adjacent. I guess the Frazier trade was the highest profile since he was an all-star. Yeah. At the same time, Mike, I'm sure it's a satisfying feeling for a lot of Pirates fans out there too, because you really feel like Cherington is starting to put his fingerprints on this team and on this organization.
Or at least you should feel that way. Ben Cherington, certainly a guy who's been there and done it before. He has built up a franchise before. Granted, a little easier to do it with the Boston Red Sox, whereas if you swing and miss and you fail a few times, they can kind of sprinkle some cash and kind of rebound and help you out there. That's not going to be the case with the Pirates, but this is a challenge that he knew what he was getting into. He's willing to undertake. And I think fans have to also realize it's okay to simultaneously like some of the moves Ben Cherington's made, even going back to the offseason based on the situation, some even solid moves there, and also be cautiously skeptical just because of what you know from ownership and what you've dealt with in years past. So I think that's a very natural perspective. But as you mentioned, last year was really, and we talked about it last year on those post-game shows, it was doomsday for the Pirates. And it wasn't just about what happened on the field, because what happened on the field last year, even this year to many degree, really irrelevant for the future of this franchise. The issue with last year was a guy like Josh Bell plummeted his value. It was nothing. And we're seeing now that the Pirates were actually lucky to get anything for him, because he has continued to have no ability to swing the bat with the Nationals and continue to be in the witness protection program with Washington as they kind of blow things up as well. So the players he thought he was going to get value for blew up in his face. Even Brian Reynolds last year was not producing, was not the guy from the year before, didn't get any value for any of those pieces he was hoping to get value for. He comes into this year, and this has been said, and it's still baffling by some degrees, that for such a bad team the Pirates have been, to have multiple all-stars and even a few other players that were arguing for it at certain points in the year with J.D. Brubaker and Tyler Anderson. That's incredible. So many individual performances this year, and that's been great for this Pirate franchise. Yes, they haven't won. They've not been a good team this year, but these individual players playing well, like Adam Frazier, who his age certainly meant he wasn't going to be a part of the future at 29, but he played maybe above himself. He had a great all-star season, led the league in hits at the time of being traded, only the third time in baseball history that had occurred. And yeah, it sucks, I guess, to see a player like that be dealt. But again, wasn't going to be part of the future, and it's very likely that he's not going to be leading the league in hits in future seasons. So it's great he can be part of a pennant race, but you sell him high. And in terms of the other moves, I don't think there's anything to point to like maybe in past Pirate rebuilds where you can say, oh, that's a horrible trade. This is the Aramis Ramirez type deal. None of those exist. Yes, there weren't any splash deals either, but he managed to get some value for some players. They boosted their value. The players that are still here played better than last year. Brian Reynolds in particular, who's now part of that future. I think he's comfortable that he can be the Robin to Hayes' Batman. Maybe wants to see more from Hayes, as he was injured most of this year and kind of in a little bit of a haze for a matter of speaking most of the season. But Jacob Stallings stepping up and kind of being a team leader. There's positives for who's going to be here next year. And Derek Shelton can be evaluated how anybody wants, but who knows if he'll be the manager when they start winning. He's kind of been a stopgap guy. But I don't think there's any reason to be upset about Ben Cherington's plan to this point. I think it's worked to what he's wanted, to what the best he can get to this point. But yeah, the splash of the interest has also been around the Pirates all across Major League Baseball with what I think has also been kind of interesting. Some recent World Series champions, and we knew contracts were up, so this was possible, not just making one or two trades with guys they can't re-sign, totally blowing it up. The Nationals and Cubs in particular. So that's kind of surprising. Two franchises in big markets in a non-salary cap sport, they know they're going to lose one guy in free agency, like say DC. They're not going to just lose that one guy and then teeter around and still be a playoff team. They're willing to blow it up and enter in an incredible rebuild, which maybe not every franchise would be willing to do without a salary cap. And maybe some would. I'm sure National fans that I know are thinking this. Why do we have to do that? But that's also been interesting so far with this deadline.
I feel for Nationals fans, Mike, they never really got a victory lap with that 2019 championship team. Last year, no fans in the stands.
Right.
This year, well, they're tanking in the first half, so we're going to sell off some assets, and that's what they did.
Right.
And the Cubs, it just surprises me. It shocks me, actually. They didn't win more and didn't perform better overall, even in the regular season, with that group that won the 2016 World Series. So they basically got two pretty good years out of that group in the post and regular seasons. But that's it for that Cubs group. And you see the talent moving out east, the Mets and the Yankees loading up. I mentioned the Padres picking up Adam Frazier. You saw the Giants and the Dodgers add on big time here. So talent headed out to the coast, I suppose, would be the theme of the MLB trade deadline period overall. And like I said, no waiver trades this year. So that's it. And I think that that was a good idea by Major League Baseball because first of all, waiver trades are hard to explain to people, and it's hard to understand exactly how they work, I think, for the average baseball fan.
Like, why are we still trading? I thought there was a deadline, right?
Yeah, what other sport would have two trade deadlines? But I guess leave it to baseball in that way. But they have eradicated that, so thankfully we had this flurry of activity. It was really quite interesting. And as far as the Pirates are concerned, we're looking at 7 total trades. They brought in, I want to say, 14 total players. Yeah, most of those players, I think, except for just one, Mike, are minor league players or were in the minor leagues. The exception being today's pickup from the Atlanta Braves, right-hander Bryce Wilson, actually pitched in the NLDS last year against the Dodgers and pitched well. He'll be slotted in presumably this weekend even against the Phillies to get a start. So we'll see him right away. He was one of the returns for Rich Rodriguez. So the Pirates deal Rodriguez. They deal Frazier, as we talked about already. They trade Tyler Anderson, who was almost very transparently acquired to be traded. So mission accomplished there. Also,
he was almost on the other side of the dugout tonight, almost too.
Yeah, could have been with the trade that was nearly consummated with the Phillies. He ends up going out west to Seattle, though. There was an injury issue, if you missed that, with one of the Phillies minor leaguers that the Pirates wanted to pick up. So that trade fell through, but the one with Seattle did not. They tried and they tried again, and they got rid of Anderson. No offense to him, but he was out of the Pirates organization, then he was back in. I thought he was a pretty decent weapon for them, whether it be out of the bullpen or perhaps as a starter somewhere down the line. But I also don't mind that you're not just painting by numbers here and trading veterans for prospects overall. In that case, Cherington liked what he saw from the Yankees organization, so he picked up a couple of guys who he hopes has higher upside. So there's no real script to this sort of thing, I suppose, is my greater point, even though for the most part, the guys that we thought would get traded were dealt at the deadline.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's really any player that's left on this team that some thought would have got traded or should have got traded. The conversation a lot of the year was around Jacob Stallings because of his age. Maybe he'd be a player that you try to sell high with his value being so high and how great of a year he's been having, and really had a solid year last year too, kind of underrated, but also a leader of the staff. Maybe you want to keep him part of that bridge to kind of lead this staff. You maybe give him credit for what the pitchers have done this year, as well as him as a hitter. And if you would have bounced him, maybe that would have been a problem for the staff as well with Brubaker and company. So maybe that makes some sense right now. And if you didn't see something, you didn't see something. But yeah, Clay Holmes maybe is an interesting piece that was dealt. But again, they get the value for who they thought they're going to get value for. They do make the Adam Frazier trade, which I know this was brought up on national broadcasts earlier in the year that, Adam Frazier's hitting so well. He's leading the league in hits. He's an all-star. Why don't the Pirates keep him and have him be around longer? at his age, it wasn't going to happen. It would have been nice in other circumstances if that could occur. And I do maybe get that animosity, but generally when Pirate players have hit around 31, 32 years old, they were unlikely to still be on the club. That's a contract they're not usually likely to be re-signed for. So we'll see. That wouldn't have been a situation that I felt like he was going to be on this team long-term anyway. And again, you don't know if the value had peaked or if it's going to be there in the future. But yeah, in terms of moves, I don't think there was anything that was god awful that Ben Cherington did or anything that majorly to complain about this deadline. He was able to make a lot of moves and kind of bring in a lot of players. And I think this is one thing that's also lost on some Pirate fans, and this is key, that we've seen from the Major League Baseball draft, where they're able to replace a little bit of the infield, which is not their depth. So that kind of made sense there. But the fact that unlike recent rebuilds, this one under Cherington, and some of this he's just lucking into, it was rebuilt prior to him, but also able to now retool again with these players and these moves, is the farm system is not barren. There are players in the Pirates farm. They have a system underneath the big club. There are players, there are prospects, there's some hope underneath the Major League Baseball system, which maybe wasn't the case in past rebuilds.
There was one player on the Pirates, you mentioned Stallings. I never really thought they were going to deal him, although the possibility was intriguing. There was one player that I thought could have fetched a pretty big return, but the problem was I didn't quite know in which category to place him, and that's Brian Reynolds. Now, last year, his value went way down. This year, his value's back up. He's looking like a legit player, doubling down on that 2019 season for sure. But I wondered, and so did Alan Saunders the last time we did a Pirates post-game show, whether he's actually going to line up, whether his club control will line up and his prime will line up with the rest of the players that presumably will rise up through the Pirates minor league system and at some point help lift their level of play overall at the major league level. So Reynolds was someone that I had my eye on, but I'm okay with them hanging on to him for sure, because it looks like that at the very least, by the time the Pirates get to where they want to go, he's going to be around for at least 1 or 2 more years, I think. I don't think this is a 5 or a 6 year plan at this point, maybe when Cherington first took it over late in 2019. But as of right now, they're a couple of years into it. And as far as I'm concerned, you had to be blown away in order to trade Reynolds. So okay with that. And you look at the rest of the roster, there's really not, it's a guy like Gregory Polanco. Does anybody want him? They might just be waiting for him to be DFA'd so he can be picked up.
I had a solid
free.
game today. I almost texted you actually when he opened up the game with what he did. I was like, if he wasn't traded, he's still been in the conversation. People have thought he was going to be moved for 2 years. He opens up this game after the deadline and pops one. So yeah, that was interesting. I think the Reynolds conversation though is interesting because I get the thinking of you're selling so high on a player that probably would fetch you more value than even Adam Frazier would, because you're seeing multiple years like this from Reynolds. If you harken back to 2 years ago, maybe around baseball, they're willing to give him a mulligan for a freaking pandemic-ridden season. That's his only negative year to this point, 3 years in. He does play all across the field, so if you got to slice him somewhere aside from the outfield, you can mix and match. It probably will be okay. He's a great clubhouse guy, can do it offensively, can do it defensively. However, he's a little younger. He's 26 years old. I think as much as the fans did complain about the Adam Frazier move just career Pirate fans hating seeing a great player be traded, not understanding that it was going to happen, that's part of this rebuild. It's a little different than what's happened in the past. If you would have traded Reynolds, I might have been able to sign with them a little bit more, because that is a player that, again, could be around a little bit longer, is younger. You're seeing 2 quality seasons off of him. To me, it seems like Cherington's okay with him being that guy with Hayes to test the waters again next year to see if they can be a part of the future when this team wins. And maybe if you're ever going to pay and if you're ever going to be able to sign somebody for a second deal, he would be the guy if he duplicates this again. And that might be where Ben Cherington eventually will have it come to roost in his mind. He has a plan. He's rebuilding. It's working so far, even though it's not wins and losses, but everyone knew they were going to suck this year and last year. So it's up again. And next year, probably it's again a part of this plan. But I feel like if you get to a point with Reynolds when he's 27 years old off another all-star season, or those type of players, and then there's not any money willing to be put forth, then you might have Cherington, then he might go up top and say, I know this isn't the Red Sox, but are you really trying to win here? So we'll see what occurs. Cherington right now might have the little thoughts of grandeur that, okay, I'm given the keys, I'm able to rebuild, We know wins don't matter right now. It's about trades, it's about wheel and dealing. This probably is fun for him in a weird, sadistic way, even though he'd rather win. This is kind of where the GM gets to do work, and you're kind of playing, not to say fantasy baseball, but this is what, anyone who grew up wanting to be a baseball GM, and we might have always had those thoughts, this is a cool time for you. Yeah, you'd rather win, and you'd rather be the one receiving these players and buying, but you're making a lot of moves. You're being really, really active, and you're going to be able to rebuild and say, this is my team. I'm stamping on this. But then eventually, if the players you choose to keep because of their age or whatever reason and how well they're playing, if then they're not brought around just because somebody doesn't want to pay them, then you might realize it's all for naught. So I think he needs to test the waters with Reynolds a bit more. If he was totally wowed and you're getting someone's top prospect and you're getting into, because the only criticism that's been out there, certainly from the Frazier trade, was they got a top 5 prospect from the Padres, but they didn't get anybody in baseball's top 100. So that's been brought up. So if you're going to dip into baseball's top 100, which certainly is hard for teams, then okay, you got to dip in for Reynolds. Then maybe that's something. But that also would increase the rebuild time frame. I think to make it a rebuild that's going to be years and years that we all knew, but not have it be 7 or 8 years and have it be closer to 3 or 4, you keep Reynolds. And maybe you catch lightning in a bottle or something like that. I think trading him, even for tons of value, would have elongated the rebuild. And I don't know if that's what you want to do. I don't know the patience of Cherington. Forget the fans. I don't know the patience of Ben Cherington. He's not been used to this. I don't know if he wants to say, I'll suck again for 2 or 3 more years just because I want to make this room about Reynolds. So I wasn't shocked Reynolds wasn't moved. Of course, if you get wowed, but I do like Reynolds still being there. I think that makes sense to keep him. Frazier, though, it makes sense to move him. And you weren't going to dip into the top 100 for Frazier because of his age and the fact that it's only been one quality year despite an all-star season. So I get teams wanting to get him, but not want to give up the farm for him.
I don't want to say this is the easy part for Ben Cherington because it's hard to evaluate 18, 19, 20-year-olds, right, guys who haven't sniffed the major leagues, and figure out exactly what's real and what's not when you talk about their potential. And there are no real answers until they get to the show. So you just have to go on your evaluations, trust your scouts, trust the analytics you have, limited as they might be in the minors, and go from there. But it is easier right now when you are losing veterans in favor of youth. You're still in that mode. It's sure, a very unidirectional approach at the moment, and it's the appropriate approach because the Pirates were going nowhere with the previous core, as it were. Right. And now here we are with that reminder of what was in the past with the return of Andrew McCutchen to PNC Park, by the way, in front of fans tonight. Yeah, by the way, the Pirates won 7-0. We're not talking much about that.
McCutchen's had a week or two
abysmal
as well.
series against the Brewers. So I guess for them, at least, Mike, they get past the deadline one, and also a little emotional lift here to beat your cross-state rival and not continue that downward trend. It's been kind of a weird last 2 weeks. You get swept by the D-backs. You beat the Giants 2 out of 3 out there, and then the Brewers wipe the floor with you at PNC Park. So I guess a return to reality for the Pirates this week.
I also think that D-back series is interesting to look back on because I remember months ago people pointing to that when both teams were among the worst in baseball, that could be the series that stops the D-backs bleeding, or that could be the series that the Pirates are able to win when they had lost so many in a row, or that could be the series with the 2 worst teams in baseball, or whatever the case would have been. And yet that ends up being the result for the Pirates there. But yeah, they've been a weird team again to have a season where you're so bad, but you have several all-stars and you have several quality individual seasons. I guess that's good for a rebuild, but it is very bizarre. It makes it somewhat interesting to watch. McCutchen's had himself a week or so though with the walk-off and then still performing here. So it's nice to see that for Andrew McCutchen with the Phillies team. It's above water there and teetering at above 500. But the only thing I can think here, Matt, I do want to ask you this because I wasn't a part of the other pre-trade deadline show as I was on my honeymoon then. But
congratulations, by the way, neglected to mention that.
Thank you. I don't actually have the ring on. It's up there on my dresser. It's been in the other shows, but nonetheless, yeah, I enjoyed myself here and got this T-shirt on in Aruba. I wasn't really in a Pirates frame of mind, but I was enjoying myself. But
you weren't thinking about the Pirates on your honeymoon?
I was not, unfortunately, no, despite the draft going on at that point, though. So I did turn it on and check out what happened there. But No, I didn't think of the Pirates then, but did dip into what went on afterwards after coming home. And there were conversation, of course, that Adam Frazier was dealt. You get prospects, you get the Padres fifth in their system, you retool. Certainly was the top player that you can move in terms of value. He was an all-star, but moved prior to the deadline. Does that bring up anything for you in terms of would you rather them have waited? Do you think there could have been more value to kind of seep out of teams if they would have waited? That was a conversation I know that existed at that time, that it felt a little maybe a quick trigger on trying to move Adam Frazier when you could have let it linger for a week or two and maybe really press teams if they're a contender. Could have been that he just got what he wanted. But do you think Cherington maybe misplayed that trade even though he made it and got some pieces?
Oh, boy, it's so hard to say, right? Now that we've gotten past the deadline and 6 other trades were made, I don't have as much of a problem with it. Right. If it were going to be a quieter deadline and he moved early, then I would question it because you're wondering what could have come. But they're still in that quantity mode. They definitely got some quantity here. At the same time, though, Mike, obviously they sent $1.4 million, no small amount for the Pirates, by the way, to the Padres in addition to
that was
Adam
weird.
Frazier
Yes, that was weird for the Pirates. Yeah.
So they must have really liked who they were getting. And Tucupita Marcano's Jack Suwinski, who already has homered for the Altoona Curve. He did it last night. And Michel Emiliano, they must have really liked what they were getting if they kicked in some cash, too. Not like the Padres are hard up for money at the moment either. So that part of it was pretty interesting for me. So it leads me to believe that was the best package that Cherington thought he could get for Frazier. So in a lot of cases, I actually think the first one to strike in a lot of cases in these trade scenarios leading up to deadlines, whatever the sport, I think the first person to strike sometimes gets a really good deal, and you can dictate the market too. So I don't mind being proactive. I think you can fall into a trap and then sometimes get nothing when you wait too long.
Well, and I think he's happy with what he got for Adam Frazier. I think Ben Cherington's happy with the overall deadline. I think he's happy right now where the Pirates are in terms of the rebuild. I think he knew when he was getting into this that it was not going to be a winning team for several years. I think he knew getting into this he was going to have to make these moves. And I think he even knew watching Adam Frazier all season long, I'm sure he said in the back of his mind, this is great because I'm going to get more value for this player. I'm sure he never was thinking, despite what was discussed by others, this is my guy for 3 or 4 years. I'm sure the eyes were bright with hearts because they knew the value was going to be there maybe for this individual player. Always knew Rodriguez was going to be moved and they would get some value there. That's kind of a cyclical thing there in the bullpen. But seeing what Tyler Anderson did, that was great because, again, that brought value for somebody that was kind of, as you mentioned at the top of the show, brought in to do that, to stabilize, to bring value, and then to move on and be that bridge. So I think Cherington's kind of got what he wanted out of this season, even though the wins and losses haven't been there, of course. He didn't get it last year, but I think this year is kind of made up for last season a little bit in terms of this rebuild. And I don't think anything has occurred this year that would set them off course. I also don't think anything has occurred this year that all of a sudden is going to mean they're going to win next year or it's going to be quicker. I think they're just kind of in neutral to this rebuild, and it's kind of currently business as planned for Ben Cherington.
Yeah, it's weird to say about a team at the major league level that has more than 60 losses before you even get to August, but it feels like bad. Feels like so far so good. Feels like it's a mission accomplished type of a season for Cherington. And that's why I allude to the fact that this is the quote unquote easy part, is because of that. It's really tough for those of us on the outside, the great unwashed, to really judge how this rebuild is going. And I'm sure even within the organization, they don't really know how the rebuild is going. But at this point, they've done what they should be doing, and I think that's pretty important here. Looking at overall the Pirates season here, we talked about Polanco. He's probably not going to be around next year. I'm looking forward to seeing Mitch Keller back up with the team. But you know what? The guy that has me the most excited right now is Rodolfo Castro. That guy is unbelievable in terms of his power potential. And no matter what era you're in, Mike, whether it's the dead ball era, whether it's now when home runs are easier to come by, maybe a little bit less easy this year since the ball doesn't seem to be traveling quite as well. Regardless, it's the launch angle era. And, you see a guy like Castro come up and hit his first 5 hits in the majors are all home runs. He gets a double tonight. And someone like that, even though he was called up from Double-A and might even be returning to Double-A very soon, it's got stars in my eyes for sure. And I'm certain that he's making some decisions more difficult for Ben Cherington, or maybe makes them more fun for the staff there to try to figure out how they can get this guy some more at-bats. We've seen players skip AAA more recently too, Mike. Alan and I talked about this too last time we were discussing who has staying power among those sensations in early July, John Nogowski and Rodolfo Castro. I'm more on the Castro bandwagon just because of the pop, and it plays no matter what. When you have that power, it can erase a lot of ills. And I think that, at least in that case, you see one pleasant surprise from the Pirate system this year, which I didn't see that one coming.
I think it's definitely Castro, number one, because of the pop, number two, because of the ability to play the infield, and the fact that those are two things the Pirates really haven't had. Those are the weaknesses in recent years in terms of having depth at the infield position and also having pop in the bat and having somebody that actually can deliver and can kind of break open a game with the one swing of the bat. Since Josh Bell had that, it hasn't been there for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Yes, Ke'Bryan Hayes flirted with it at the end of last year in that September that all of a sudden snagged headlines away from the Steelers, as shocking as that was, even while the Pirates were in the midst of a poor season. Hayes showed up, popping his bat, everybody excited. And then, of course, the injuries kind of faded that away. So I would say for me, maybe, while you could point to any of these young players, certainly maybe even if any of these pitchers could rebound and do the same thing for next year. Interesting to see if Brubaker does the same thing next year. He started off this past season, or this current season, with a Cy Young type of clip the first month and a half, and then he tapered off and came back down to earth. We'll see what happens next year. But for me, it almost still kind of points to Hayes a little bit. I think that's the only negative you could say as part of this rebuild. That entering the season, I think I even did a show on this, one thing the Pirates had to establish this year amongst these trades and figuring out who's going to be there and getting value back is Ke'Bryan Hayes, the face of the franchise. Is he the guy that was on MLB Network every day and everyone's saying he's already the number 3 outfielder in all of baseball off of 1 month? Or where he ranks and who he compares to, and is comparing him to Ken Griffey Jr. and players like that. It seemed, as great as he is and as much talent is there, it did seem a little bit of cart before the horse in terms of tons of hype around Ke'Bryan Hayes for such a bad team entering the year. And the injuries calmed him down. It wasn't like he sucked. It was the injuries. It was re-aggravating things, maybe some undercover drama based on some reporters that I talked to on some post-game shows on that situation. But now he's there. He's having a so-so ride since returning, but nothing to steal any headlines, certainly. Next year, can he be fully healthy? Can he be on the field? Can there be conversation about him that is not drama-related? Not to say he's doing anything to fuel that, but not speculation about when he'll play and re-aggravation in his interest in playing this year, etc. Can we be about Ke'Bryan Hayes on the field, clearly showing he's the face of the franchise, he's the best player on the team, he's one of the best players in Major League Baseball, and giving you that season that compares to Andrew McCutchen in 2012 maybe. They weren't yet winning, but you could tell, okay, he's the best player on this team, he's one of the best players in baseball, the team isn't good enough, but he's one of the best players in baseball already, and then he'll be that guy when the team starts winning. Talent's there. When he's been in there, in the amount of games, it's been there. But you need to see more from Hayes. So that's the only negative I can point to in the rebuild, that you wanted to enter the year thinking you at the end of this year, Hayes is your guy. And I don't think that's been established this year, whether it's his fault or not. So you need to almost reestablish it again next year. So he is somebody to definitely literally key in on and watch if he can actually be that guy for a full season.
Yeah, I hate to punt that evaluation down the road one more year, but you're right. There's only 60 games left, give or take, in this season. I think the first half, leading up until this month of July, I was okay just saying, all right, it's an injury. It's an injury to the hand, to the wrist, sensitive area. A guy like that with quick hands who relies on his hands in a lot of ways, maybe more than most with that swing. I was just willing to watch that first half of the year and say, all right, we'll start over here. So now it's time to start producing. It's time for him to find his rhythm. He's still not looking like he has his timing down. I know a couple of times tonight, once at least last night, he's jamming himself on some pitches. He's not taking pitches the other way like we saw with extreme authority last year. So it's not all the way back. Yes, it's been there in fits and starts, but it hasn't been there as, quote, consistently as it was last year, admittedly being a 60-game season. It was a sprint, and he showed a lot, though, Mike, in that short sample. And it wasn't just surface area numbers. It was also velocity. It was also barrels. It was a lot of the advanced numbers that we can get now from MLB StatCast, and just the launch monitors that we have in play, all the ways that we can figure out the performance underlying the numbers. Right. Hayes was number one or right there with anybody in the major leagues when it came to squaring the ball up last year. So not so much this season.
That's what led to the hype, I feel. So
exactly.
It wasn't
the hype
unfounded.
Was justified.
It was justified hype, but it still was a lot of hype. And then unfortunately, you also got to think where he is mentally. I mean, he's able to have spurts again, and he's had a quality rebound a little bit from the injury, but there was unknown for a while. You have tons of hype. You deliver. The hype is warranted. You start out even that first weekend being so great. You get injured. Where are you going to be? And I think the second half of the season maybe is important for him individually.
I'm just glad we got to see that sneak preview of him last year, because if this was his debut, it'd be pretty, I don't want to call it disappointing, but it would be disappointing. It would be a downer for sure. But last year you saw the potential, and whether there are fans in the stands or not, whether it was a COVID delayed season or not, that was real baseball talent on display. That's the kind of stuff that scouts salivate over, and that's the type of a player that GMs base their entire careers on. In some cases, like you said, he's a McCutchen type talent when it comes to the raw ability. Now, McCutchen made the most out of that ability. You could argue he, after a couple of early years, he was a toolsy guy in the majors in 09 and 10, but then 11 and 12, especially in 12, he really came on. So Key Bryant still has some time here to match that timeline. It's an ambitious timeline, admittedly, but if you play for the Pirates, you're going to have to produce in the first 6 years, or you're probably not going to be a Pirate after that. Or even if you do produce, you're not going to be a Pirate.
Right, and maybe if you do produce, you won't want to be a Pirate based on where they are.
Yeah,
if you want to get more money. Yeah.
I hate to get nihilistic about it. We had a tweet, someone saying, I'll watch the Pirates post-game show when they change their owner. I understand there's a whole bunch of folks out there who just aren't going to engage with the Pirates. And if you're watching right now, you're probably not one of those people. But I'm just going to put it out there and say that it does take away from the enthusiasm for this team, because the Pirates are just a non-starter for people right now with the way that they are run. At least for me, Mike, it's not Neil Huntington anymore. And no offense to him, he did a nice job here, but it was just time for a pair of fresh eyes on this team. And for the most part, just turn over the whole front office and see what you can do with a very challenging situation. And Cherington could very well fail at the rebuild, and that doesn't make him a bad GM or a bad talent evaluator. It just means perhaps he's not a miracle worker, or he's not able to catch that lightning in a bottle that you alluded to, that we often talk about with small market teams in a sport that doesn't have a salary cap. It has salary restrictions in the form of a luxury tax, but even that's not a hard cap. So as high as that is right now. So everything's working against him. We know that right now, whether it be ownership, whether it be just the economics of baseball. But after this trade deadline, you can at least in my view, Mike, if you're a Pirates fan who is still on board with this team, I don't think there's any reason to say that Cherington left anything on the table here. So that's my takeaway for this one. It's a small victory. It's a moral victory. Honestly, it's nothing real on the scoreboard yet. But in the ways that he will be evaluated, Cherington I'm talking about, this is pretty good, I think. And it was nice to flood the system with talent. We heard that from Neil Huntington early in his tenure, early in the rebuild effort. It took Huntington took over in late 2007. It took until 2013 for them to have a winning season. It took until 2011 really for them to have a year in which they were frisky for part of the year. So Cherington's still in year 2. And he's got a couple more before we start wondering, I think, the true efficacy of what he's done here in Pittsburgh.
I think Ben Cherington has done his job. I don't think there's anything to point to say Ben Cherington has failed or not done his job to this point. I think Ben Cherington is still very early in this process. What I am concerned about and what I am going to watch again for Ben Cherington as we progress here and as you continue in this rebuild process, if you know it's working, you should have less players that you're willing to ship off for value. Yes, eventually you got to figure out who's going to be there, who you're going to keep. You want them to keep playing well, But this was the year to just kind of guns blaze, except for Hayes. Probably nobody else is untouchable. Maybe Reynolds too with how he's been playing, but that was a debate. Everyone else, okay, get value back. Who can I get value for? If it's legit, I'll make the trade. If not, I'll stabilize for a year or so. But when you get 2 or 3 years from now, regardless of whether they're winning or losing, you're going to have to have your core in mind. That was what Huntington did, and it led to at least a 13-15 run, even though they didn't win a playoff series. That's going to have to be in mind for Cherington. That's going to have to be in his thought process now, but I don't think he's done anything wrong. I do get the Pirate mindset, though. I get it. I get it, those who are jumped off the wagon. I get those who aren't going to jump on until they realize the core has been established and are going to start to win. Because, yeah, people can complain all day about the small market, but people are also not dumb. They're going to see the Rays and what they're doing with their payroll. They're going to see the Royals went to back-to-back World Series and won one. They're going to have a whole list of teams across Major League Baseball since 92 that have at least been to the LCS in their league, and the Pirates having not been there. And that's not Cherington's fault at all. He's only 2 years in. But that's going to be in the craw of many of the fans. You can't hold that against Cherington. But it will be interesting now, as Cherington has been successful so far in the rebuild for what he's paid to do, regardless of wins and losses, rebuilding this franchise that was very far from that when he took over. It'll be interesting to see how this process works and the relationship between him and ownership, because the further along he gets, he's going to realize how much he thinks they really want to win, and their emphasis is on winning in comparison to what he's previously dealt with. As I said earlier, he's dealt with franchises that he rebuilt it. He rebuilt the farm. It took a year or two. And then he said, okay, I did this. They said, your reward is I'm going to buy this guy, or I'm going to reward you with that contract for that guy. Now we're going to go win. That may not occur with the Pirates at all. They may not even resign Brian Reynolds after what he's doing, and that could anger Ben Cherington. So how will that work? Does he currently have thoughts of grandeur that he was sold something where he was told, we will do this different than in the past from what you hear once you do this rebuild for me? And if that doesn't happen, will he feel like he's been here all for naught? Because I don't know, as much as he knew this would be different going in, it's one thing to say it's not the Red Sox and they can't just go ahead and fix your mistakes by spending some money. But it's another thing to be knee deep in it like Ben Cherington is right now. He may love the challenge and salivate on the challenge, but it's a different animal. He can't make any mistakes. I don't think he's made any at this point, but he really can't make any. So it will be interesting how he handles really realizing the situation, really realizing the differences, how long this does go. And did he really realize the challenge he was undertaking? Because as you mentioned, he could be successful to his job and not get a postseason series win out of this group. You could absolutely make an argument that that even at the end of the line, where certainly people are not going to feel it was a great success because of how it was kind of teared up a little too quick, maybe in 15, because of how it ended. But when you're going from 07 to what it was in 011, after how bad it was for before 2007 in the early 2000s, where it was just embarrassing baseball, horrendous trades by previous management, then to get 13-15. You know, once you get in the playoffs, that's a crapshoot a lot of the time to win those playoff series. They did run into some problems with those aces. And to get to that point, I think maybe it's underrated on how hard it was to get to that point in that previous regime. But it did not result in a playoff series at the end of the day. So this is tougher. It's very likely he's going to feel he did his job and was successful, and probably not get a ring on his finger for this like he did in his previous job. So we will see if Cherington's aware of what he got himself into and how this progresses.
I think just getting this franchise back to within shouting distance of the postseason would be worth something. Maybe not a ring, but it'd be worth a wreath or maybe a bronze medal. We're in the Olympics.
Bronze medal, yeah.
Right now. You bring up an interesting point about the honeymoon period. I was saying the honeymoon's not over yet for Ben Cherington, perhaps. Well, speaking of honeymoons, you would know all about that, of course. But
mine is over, unfortunately. But it's still in our relationship, even though we're no longer in Aruba. It's going on forever, I'll tell the wife.
But there's almost a reverse honeymoon here where Cherington is evaluating the ownership group and seeing how serious they are as well. So
that's what I think. I mean, honestly, yeah. I'm dead serious. I don't know if he really knew what he was getting into until he's in it. And he won't find out if he knew what he was getting into and how it'll be until probably 2 years from now, and Brian Reynolds might be that guy. If Brian Reynolds does this again and does it again, and he has a price tag, and he still only will be 28 years old, and Hayes comes to the table and say, I want Brian Reynolds. They're a little better. They're winning 77 games or something like that, even though they're not yet 500. And he hears from the top, we just can't do it. We're totally hands are tied. We're just not going to do it. He might say to himself, what the hell? I was lied to 3 years ago. I did everything I had to do. You're not even going to do it for one man, and your payroll's still going to be bottom of the league. What the hell? The differences of those other small franchises, most part, certainly the Royals, when they did it in those few years, they were willing to, small market, you did it in the draft, you did it in the farm, you toil around, you have it on low rent contracts and guys playing above themselves. And then you sprinkle in overpaying for a guy like James Shields that not nearly worth what he was getting paid, but did have great playoff starts for you. Eventually, you maybe got to open up the book a little bit. And if that doesn't happen, what will his thoughts be? It'll be interesting for us if there's some drama to report on, but that'll be interesting to keep an eye on.
Yeah, so much of that right now has stayed internal, and
well, we're far away from there.
Operating under the premise that at some point they're going to up the ante, and the matter will be how many degrees will they up the ante? They up the ante slightly, but not enough to even match the Kansas City Royals payroll when they were good. 4 or 5, 6 years ago. So it was a little bit, it wasn't enough. In terms of the players, Brian Reynolds is still here. Gregory Polanco is still here. Jacob Stalling's still here. The rest of the guys that we thought had a chance of being traded were pretty much dealt off. So that's the story. A busy deadline across MLB as well. I know I enjoyed that aspect of it. Really a fun week if you like player personnel, because the NHL had its open of free agency as well, with the pandemic messing up the schedules and the calendars. Yeah, we had some convergence here, so we get a little bonus if you like that sort of thing, which increasingly I think fans like the off season as much as they like they like player movement as much as they like the actual games, I should say, since we're still in the season.
Matt, what's made the NBA so popular, and why is it number 2 to the NFL in terms of national media? The off season, more than the regular season. I mean, and you had that 24-hour period, NHL free agency, Major League Baseball trade deadline, NBA draft, NBA making moves in 24. And now it's not great to be a DC sports fan in that 24-hour period, but in that 24-hour period, all 3 of those leagues were popping off with moves. And of course, the NFL getting underway. So yes, this has kind of weirdly moved us in the calendar here in a vortex because of the pandemic, but it has clustered things. So, yeah, it was nice to see a little bit of movement and have a wacky deadline after having it be so mundane a year ago because everyone was kind of terrified. Obviously the Yankees always pay, but I think the Yankees might have been the most interesting team. You could point to the Padres. We knew they were going to buy. You could point to the Dodgers. They always do that with Scherzer, and who knows what will happen with Trevor Bauer, but that could be just a ridiculous, maybe the greatest in terms of individual resume starting 5 for any team ever. Whether they deliver or not is a second conversation. But the Yankees bringing in a guy like Rizzo and making all these moves in the bullpen, etc., they don't even have the playoffs stabilized. They can make all those moves and miss. So it's a lot of teams buying. I guess maybe if you're a skeptical Pirate fan, maybe I'll leave you with this. If you're a skeptical Pirate fan, you're probably sitting there saying, if you're not looking at the full picture, if you're not going to really deep dive and digest, and I get not doing so, well, the same teams made moves. They added more. Rich got richer and the poor got poorer, and it's on with the next Major League Baseball season. So that kind of did happen this year. We'll see how that pegs and how that translates into the postseason.
You can get mad about that for free agency, but when it comes to trades, no one's twisting anybody's arm to make them make a trade. So it just so happens that the big market teams, the haves, rated the have-nots when you're talking about major league talent, and that's just, I like trades. You know what? It's fine as far as that's concerned. Off-season stuff, when you're spending $200 million more than another team in the same league as you, that's an issue for me. But trades are good, clean fun. So that's why I love this time of year, especially in baseball. Mike, you've got some football coming up with the Steelers, obviously opening camp here. So we're looking forward to more content regarding that on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I just posted a Pens video, one of my net front presence videos on Jake Gensel and the Penguins and why he should be one of those franchise pillars. Don't even think about trading him. I make my case in 2 minutes there. And we'll have additional Pirates post games throughout the rest of this stretch run. What is it, 60 games left, something like that, 2 months left in the season as we look now to player development, basically. the fun's over in terms of trade scuttlebutt and all that rumor mill stuff that keeps us so engaged. If you just like baseball, though, if you like watching young players develop, you're going to like what the Pirates are putting out there right now, because we're going to find out quite a bit over the course of the final 60 games or so. Mike, I enjoyed it. Good to talk to you again. Thanks for doing this with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to be a part of it after missing the other one, but I was on my honeymoon, so I can't be upset about that. But yeah,
we forgive you. We forgive you.
A lot coming on the channel, and of course, even college football has reared their ugly heads with some news here.
Yeah,
in the
how did I forget about that? Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually I will welcome to all the new subscribers and people watching these videos, because thanks to the Big 12, engagement happened here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I actually put a tweet out there that I could have said, "Hi, I'm Mike, and I'm going to talk the Big 12," and that's 1,000 views. That's really been the case recently. So yes, that has occurred, and we'll see how that moves forward. And that's news every single day, of course. Pittsburgh Sports Now, Nittany Sports Now, and WV Sports Now, where that's most of the coverage there, obviously, with the Mountaineers currently in the Big 12, has all that college talk going on in those sites, and how it impacts everybody and their brother, and how everyone's moving around, and how nothing is stable and everything's buck wild and crazy, and it even involves ESPN in a little conspiracy possibly. So if you like following something that's likely going to be a future ESPN 30 for 30, this is it. Because I feel like at some point they're going to make a documentary on what's going on right now, or somebody should. But yeah, a lot going on the channel. I'd recommend bottom of the video clicking that subscribe button, and of course hitting up all the sites.
No cease and desist letters filed from me to Mike, or vice versa, or in Major League Baseball. But there was some legal action in college sports, and that looks to continue on. All right, for Mike, Asti, and for all of you, thank you for joining us on today's show. Bucko trade deadline talk. It's over. Let's assess, and let's see where the pieces settle in here for the end of the season. I'm Matt Gajtka saying good night on Pittsburgh Sports Live.
All right.